it's Rin. In this video, I'll be explaining how I drew and animated the scene of Aqua from Oshi falling into a state of madness. That was a clip from the group cover and original MV that I made with my friends. I'll drop the link here, so definitely go check it out if you haven't already seen it. I will first explain how I got the storyboard inspiration for this, the references I used, the drawing process in Clip Studio Paint, the rigging process in Live2D, and finally bringing it all together in After Effects. Because we are making a scene for a music video, we start by interpreting the lyrics and the mood of the song. The key section of the song that I wanted to use this scene for is the second pre-chorus and the final chorus. I find this part of the song the most intense part because the second pre-chorus is the softest section of the song and in my interpretation also the saddest part, and it then transitions into the final chorus where the music and the percussion builds up really rapidly. The lyrics also reflects this transition, shifting from a sense of hopelessness and lacking of love into Aqua's obsessive drive to protect his sister and seek revenge for Ai with any means necessary. So I aim to capture Aqua's transformation from this sense of bleakness and loss of faith towards the world to one of dark, frenzied determination, which he also showed in the anime. So moving on to the references and inspiration of the scene. As you might already have guessed, the expressions I went with were inspired by these two scenes in the anime. First when Aqua's black star appears when he was a child, and next when Aqua acts as a stalker. These moments were really memorable and visually striking to me, and I thought the stalker scene also purposefully mimicked the real stalker that he had witnessed, which also gives a glimpse into the obsessive revenge motive that Aqua has. So I really wanted to capture that in my scene. I also stumbled upon this beautiful MV which hugely inspired the movement in my animation for this scene. On to drawing the scene. I initially started by testing the movement in frame by frame, which I'm actually not very good at, but I wanted the chance to practice. So I used Clip Studio Paint's animation tools to draft out the motion that I wanted in frame by frame. I wanted Aqua to slowly hunch over and look downcast while hiding his face and expression before flipping the switch and exposing his new crazed demeanor. I didn't use the frame by frame work in the end, but this exercise was incredibly helpful in breaking down the movement and expressions I needed to achieve in Live2D. Once I decided I was done with practicing frame by frame, I chose the previous frame I had from the exercise and started cleaning up the sketch. I drew Aqua in his Stalker Vibes hoodie in the dark, so with some backlight, to capture the dark intense mood he's in. Then I drew the hand on a separate layer and had an idea that I could experiment with him pulling his bangs up to expose his eyes with the new black star that emerged. Then I rendered the layers in detail. I'm using the Clip Studio Paint automated time-lapse here, so unfortunately you can't see the layer separation, but it should be quite straightforward to imagine that for this artwork. Next, I create a variation of the scene using Anton's character, which we'll use in some of the earlier pre-chorus sections of the song. Finally, I draw the individual hair strands that Aqua pulls up. I was pretty excited to see what we can do with it in Live2D because I've actually not done anything like this before. So now we move on to using Live2D. This MV was actually my first time rigging for artworks besides VTuber models, so I was experimenting quite a bit with the workflow. For this sort of animation, you have to think about the animation sequence itself, which is why the frame-by-frame exercise was really helpful for this purpose. With that said, I will take you through the types of movements that we made for this artwork. I won't be including the full time-lapse because it's a whole hour-long video, but I'll be extracting the key parts of the time-lapse to show you the general workflow and how I incorporate certain tools and Live2D tricks for a smoother rigging workflow. If you like to observe and follow along to the time-lapse itself, I've uploaded the full process on my Ko-fi site. It'll be a great way to support my work while being able to refer to my process in a chronological order from start to finish. One of the questions I had when I first started rigging was, when do you need to change the art mesh and manually create the vertices? So Live2D has an automatic mesh generator, which over the years have become really good. So if your layers are quite clean, if you use line art especially, the mesh generator works really well, and most of the time you wouldn't need to edit it manually. I usually set it to the standard preset for the automatic generation, and then for stuff like the eyes and the hair, I'll set it to the complex preset. I only go in to edit the art meshes for certain parts, such as the tips of the hair. Especially for this artwork, I didn't bother separating the hair layers much, so the whole bangs is like just 2 layers. So I really needed to go in to edit the tips of the hair to be able to warp it properly. I also edit the art mesh for the facial features because these get deformed quite significantly. For example, the eyelids, they need to be nicely structured. And lastly, for parts that you need to use glue on, you will need to edit the art mesh so that the 2 layers have matching meshes at the glue point. I usually do physics as the first step of the parameters before I do the others. For this artwork, I wanted his hair to flow with the wind to add some mood to the scene, and also for the hair and the clothes to react to his body and head movement. So it's my first time rigging a hair layer with so little separation, so I had to play around with the warping quite a bit to ensure that we have a smooth and natural movement even with just 2 layers of hair. If you realize you have this issue, you're free to go back to your art file, do more separation, and re-import the layers. That might make things easier for you as well. The hair physics are quite similar to the VTuber rigging physics. So you'll have the hair moving sideways, primarily for the wind because we don't have the head turning sideways in this rig. And then we also have the hair bouncing up and down, which responds to the head angle Y parameter that we have for this rig. I do the same for Anton's and Aqua's version of the hair, and also making sure to do the same with the hair shadow layers. You'll notice that the keyforms for many of these physics parameters have a square tip to it rather than the usual circle. That's because we are using the blend shape option here. I won't go into too much detail about this, but blend shapes essentially allow you to stack the keyforms of multiple parameters on the same deformer without having to adjust each compounded corner keyform manually. So this means that you don't need to be creating a new warp deformer for every new parameter you want to rig, and you can stack all the hair physics onto one single deformer for that group of layers. So here's the warp deformer hierarchy for hair physics, for example, if you are using the normal parameters versus the one warp deformer if you're using blend shapes. Next, I also animate the small hair strands, which would react to the wind, the head movement, as well as swaying and falling when the hair brushes through it. In hindsight, I should have transferred these to another set of hair parameters so that only the strands will react to the hand touching it and not the entire bangs. Next, we move on to the hoodie physics, which is responding to the wind, the body movement, the head movement, as well as the hand pushing it up. I edit the art mesh so that the vertices will follow along the folds of the hoodie. This ensures that the lines don't get janky and wonky if you deform them. So here's the before and after. As we had experimented in frame by frame earlier, we want a parameter for Aqua to look downcasted and have his face really hidden in the shadow, and also to look upwards as he switches to his crazy expression. So that's what angle Y is doing here. Notice how when the head moves, the hoodie also moves together with it and has a nice 3D depth effect. This can be simply done by using glue on the inner and outer layers of the hoodie. So how you do this is you edit the art mesh of the overlapping parts so that the vertices for both of them match. And then you can select the vertices on both layers and glue them together. And once you've edited the glue weights to make it natural, when you warp the front of the hoodie now, the inner hoodie also follows along. This gives the hoodie movement a little bit of that 3D depth without having to warp both of them separately. Also pay attention to how the shadow casted directly by the hoodie on the face moves together with the layer. The key parameter that we want for this animation is for Aqua's hand to be pushing up his hair. This parameter involves a lot of so-called interaction between the layers because the hand touches the hair strands, it touches the main hair bangs, as well as pulling up the hoodie very slightly. So to rig this hand movement, I first start out by rotating the hand so that it comes up from under the canvas. And then I deform it slightly to show that the hand angle is changing slightly, especially around the wrist area. I also want the fingers and the palm to be moving more naturally, so here I'm going in to edit the art mesh to make it more detailed so that I can deform it more naturally. And of course I set the hair strands opacity to 0 when the hand goes below the hair level. I also push up the bangs that are being covered slightly so that we are exposing the eyes. And finally, I also add a warp deformer for the hoodie to be pushed upwards slightly as the hand brushes over it. The rest of the rigging for the angle Y parameter is pretty similar to a VTuber model, just that your artwork isn't facing the front directly like a VTuber model is. One thing that can help if you're struggling with these non-front facing head angles is to draw the pose and angle sketch guides. So this is where the frame by frame sketches that we made earlier could be very useful. We also have a parameter for Aqua to hunch over, which is body Y, and on the other side of body Y, we have him straightening out his back and also making him lean towards the side a bit. So with this sort of non-VTuber artworks, you have a lot more freedom to play with the natural movement of a person. So the artwork doesn't need to be bouncing upwards just because it's a body Y movement to go up. Instead, it's more natural for him to lean towards the side. And you'll see how this makes the final animation look a lot more natural. So these two parameters, angle Y and body Y, have been rigged so that they can be used together with some delayed keyframing on one of the movements to display some follow-through action once we get into After Effects. Next, I'm adding keyforms to the hand deformer so that it adjusts to both the head and body keyforms. It's getting a bit complicated here with us stacking 4 parameters on this one warp deformer, but thankfully the movements aren't too wide and easier to deal with. The rest of the parameters are quite similar to the typical ones we do in VTuber model rigging, For example, the breathing parameter, creating wind physics, the eye movements, the brow movements, expressions, mouth changes, etc. And another small detail is that I want the eye star to glow when he opens his eyes or when his hand reveals his eyes. So I first simplify the art mesh into fewer points just to mark out each of the spikes, and then directly warp the spikes to bloom and shrink with the parameter. Then we edit the physics settings for this so that it reacts to both the eye opening and the hand parameter inputs. I do some final checks on the parameters and the physics settings, and then in the very last step, we generate the texture atlas for the layers. Please do this step only at the end of your process, especially for large art files, because once the texture atlas is generated, the model gets displayed in full resolution in your workspace, so it might make the Live2D software very laggy. I also usually make a backup of the file just before creating the texture atlas, because for large files, sometimes creating the atlas would cause the program to crash. With the texture atlas, make sure that all the layers are being displayed at 100% zoom unless you want to downsample the layer size. And so we're done with the Live2D step. We now have a couple of movements that we can utilize to make our animation sequence. The final step is to keyframe the movements and compose the full scene. You can do the character keyframing either in Live2D's animation editor or After Effects using the official Live2D plugin. So I've tried both methods and prefer doing it in After Effects because I'm more familiar with the controls in After Effects. And I personally think that After Effects has more mature keyframing tools. I won't go into the details of the keyframing, but for this scene, I split it into the character layers animation, the background, and the foreground. For the character layer, I used the parameters that we rigged in Live2D and timed it to the music beat. For the background, I did a flashback/rewind collage of our previous scenes and also timed it to the music's beat. For the foreground, I made very custom typography for this scene specifically by splitting the text into strokes and animating each of them manually. I also used some effect speed lines to make the scene look more intense and epic. I'm actually really proud of the typography here. It was really time-consuming to do, but was it worth it? Yes. I put them all together, do some final color adjustments and transition effects, and we're done! Here's the final result. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful and enjoyed seeing the breakdown of everything that went into making this short clip. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions and would like to see more of these breakdowns for the other scenes in this MV. Again, you can download the full Live2D time-lapse on my Ko-fi site. Thank you for staying to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.